All right, guys, we're going to do a tier list for Kaiju number 8, the game, featuring the brand new characters. Hopefully you enjoy the video. Make sure that thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below who you think the top 3 characters in the game are and why. We did a tier list not all that long ago, but obviously we got Gen in the game and we need to update it as well. So I don't have my base one that I have anymore. I don't know exactly what happened to it, but what I'll tell you is that I actually am happy that I'm redoing this, and where this one will be much shorter, I promise. I'm really happy that I'm redoing this because those new stages changed also my perspective on some of these characters. Some of them, admittedly, I still haven't been able to test or use there yet, maybe because they're not built up, etc. But we do have a little bit of a new perspective. So Kaiju number 8, again, the new stages are right. It's like the permanent fierce battle specifically. Anyway, Kaiju number 8, A tier. He is just all right. Still is, and frankly, I think that his issues are exasperated. Is that the right word? They're magnified, if you will, in the newer content because he just does. He really needs another sustain beside him, which is not great because he wants to be your sustain for your team. And the other sustains are able to do it, but he's a DPS that's trying to do it too. So he's just a weird character. He's like this jack of all trades type character, trying to be a master of single target DPS, I guess. He can still peak pretty highly, but there are far better characters now in the game. And he will probably continue to slide because the inability to use uniparts or different weapons, etc., which is something that is cool early game, but not great for him in terms of longevity. This Kikaru, not going to bother with her. Ashiro, A rank. Hoshina, I'll put him at an S tier because he's still the most used support character other than Chester, who will be an SS for the record. Might as well just do it now. And so there's that. But what I will say about these characters is they really get pressured. They really get... okay, so... versus the new content, they get pressured, yes, but they really get pressured against Kaiju 10. There's something with that Kaiju 10 fight as opposed to Kaiju 2. You can feel like that Kaiju 10 is just a better, harder hitting enemy. So it really pressures and really magnifies the issue with certain characters. And that's the stage you really want, like Akari or Sagan or Isao, like these other sustained characters. So these characters really get pressured. They get on the verge of dying. It's kind of hard because you can't really brute force pure DPS through that. However, on the Kaiju 2 fight after that, you can. And if you're wondering why I'm basing my list so heavily off of that, is because that is the newest content in the game. And thus, it's the hardest content in the game. And using the hardest content in the game as a base is, in my opinion, the best way to go about this. Now, there will be a caveat in here when we get to Rin, because she's a specialty character, so she'll get a little bit of a shout out, but that's mostly it. Reno, Iharu, these other characters, they're down here. Now, like I've said a billion times, I think every character in this game is usable, right? I think that you can use any of these characters. You could use their damage over time. Iharu has some stuff in there, like effect hit rate, and it could be useful. I think he has a defense down as well, I believe. Again, being here doesn't mean that they're not usable, because they certainly are usable. There's things in there that you can do, but I'm not really going to entertain it all too much for the most recent content. But again, if you need to plug in, say for example, you don't have Sagan, so you need to plug in Tay. Well, there you go. And for the record, Tay and Kota will be a tier higher for that exact reason, because in the new Fierce Battle, there are stages that want you to have Reno or Sagan, quite clearly want you to have Reno or Sagan, and the only other alternative is going to be these characters. I actually did test Tay there. She's not an earth-shattering character or anything like that, but she gets the job done, so there's that. Anyway, these other two, I'll put him just a smidge higher because he's a blunt hitter, and that's it. I believe he's got the stun. Don't care much about the poison on this one. Ari, she's going all the way up to S tier. She actually, with this new content, got a big bump. She was typically around here in A tier, but she's actually jumping to S tier. Now, I think that Ashiro is a better character in most content, for the record, but I do think that in the newer content, again, sustains are pretty valuable, whether it's that or maybe you're struggling with a limited Fierce Battle, which is the second newest content. Akari is a character that you can plug in. I have traditionally said that you don't need sustain characters because that's mostly been the case, but I feel like they heard me say that, and maybe even watch my video where Sagan soloed the hardest content in the game at the time, because she did do that when I had that video go out a while ago, and I don't know that she can do that anymore. But I feel like that was a really big complaint, was that from the Japanese community, probably especially, that there wasn't hard enough content, and they even said that they're really trying to bring in harder content, and so they've been doing that. And I think that on that Kaiju 10 fight especially, you don't need her on Kaiju 2. You can pure DPS Kaiju 2, but Hoshina's not going to pure DPS Kaiju 10 from my experience. Maybe you have a different experience. And so I think that she's very valuable, and then her ult charge rate is very good. So there's that. Kikaru, just an okay character, not a character I think you should really be going out of your way to use. Solid blast attacker, solid individual target DPS on the ultimate, but nothing fancy. Rio, another good support character, but again, the game really is skewing more towards Chester and the new Note Army as the main supports, and so he's getting a bit suppressed here. I don't think you should really be trying to use Rio all too much. I think there's a niche build with him and Chester that you could go to. He's also if you don't have Chester, you could potentially go to him. He's the next best character at the things Chester does, I guess, but other than that, I'm not really going that way. Tagon, SS, easily, extremely strong character. She doesn't do much damage, but boy, does she do literally everything else. Boy, does she do. She does literally everything else. The only other thing you can nitpick with her is that she is very selective. She does not really protect her allies all too much if the enemy is going to do blast attacks on you, or if they're going to do full-on AoE hits like Kaiju 2 likes to do, where he just does that freaking electric shock or whatever the hell he does. She's not able to protect them in that situation. In that case, you'd want a character like Isao, or you would be healing afterwards with a character like Akari. Kaiju number 8 also can't do anything about that, so those are the only characters that are truly able. And then Kota's another defender. He is an individual shield character as well, so like he's just not able to do anything about it either. But that's mostly it if you're nitpicking. She's also extremely valuable in that Kaiju 10 fight. Arguably the best character you can have just in general in that content. Similar to Kikaru, who we have not talked about, the new one, of course. But extremely strong character, limited. And again, she doesn't really do much damage. So there's that. But overall, really good. Hoshina, by my money, still the best character in the game, just because pure damage. But that stupid fight really makes it feel like the rest of the top characters have caught up to him in quality because of that, but then he just blows up the Kaiju 2, so I don't know. But still the best DPS purely in the game. Does obviously still have an issue with resonance, which is where that Kaiju 10 fight is kind of annoying, because those side Kaijus have a lot of HP, so it's kind of hard for him to get to resonating. So it is what it is, but really strong character, of course. Ashiro, just not going to entertain this. Don't think she's a character you should be using. I can say she's got some specialty stuff in terms of being a giant kaiju killer, but she requires far too much setup and is very technical in terms of gameplay. And I think for her first ult is the real problem, but after that it may line up much better, but the missing the 100% crit rate is pretty annoying. And so ultimately, and then also, I'm going to be honest with you, I could make an argument for her to go lower. And you want to know why? Because she loses her damage, a lot of it anyway, not all of it, but a good bit of it, if she's one not versus a giant kaiju. So there's that. So flat out, you just can't even take her against a humanoid kaiju 10. But unless he's, again, the giant form, which we're not seeing in these newer stages. But they hit so hard. So she loses the attack when she's below 80%. I could seriously make an argument to push her lower. But I'll leave her there out of respect for her. Hoshina, another character that I don't think is a character you should be using. He's not going to go any higher. Flat out doesn't perform well in this content anyway. There are better characters to be using the blast attack on, or the combat skill on, than him for his little feather hitting AoE. He does okay in certain content like story content, but that's not the barometer we're basing this on. I'm trying to base these characters off of what I think is the hardest content currently in the game. And there's that. I will acknowledge that for him, just like I will in a minute with Rin, I think there's better characters than him other than Rin, but he is one of the better characters to put in that large conquest mode, which is a mode I expect to get updated consistently, just like the other tower mode in the game. So he will always be a character that is useful there. Ashiro's dedicated mode, I guess, would be a raid, I guess. 5-star Ashiro, I guess, is a raid. But even then, it's just, they don't run that very often, for one. Maybe it's because they ran it consecutively, so they're going to sit on it for a bit. But even then, I just don't think you're best suited bringing her. I just think you're better off using other characters. But I will give him a little bit of a nod. So could technically move him up, but I'm not going to. Narumi. He is actually still extremely strong. I don't think he's one of the best characters in the game. I do think he's one of the best characters in the game, excuse me. But I want to push him down. He's still the best in the game at what he does. I'll go SS with him. I want to pull him down just a little bit, but I can't ignore the fact that he's hitting 3 targets, and that's extremely valuable. But I think there's a clear tier break in here where I think that I need one more. I need SS, I guess, and that would be the separator in here. I'll add SSS because I think there's a clear tier break between these characters and him. That's the thing. I think there's a very clear tier break. So we'll go SSS and that's the only one of these I'm going to do because I could do this all throughout this and go A-, B+. I could do that all the way in through. We're not going to do that. But I think there's a very clear separation, but I think he's better than the characters in S2 and more usable. Same goes for Isao. Isao's going into SS. I think Isao is very strong in this content. Another character you can use if you don't have... also, Blunt is very valuable. So there's that, but he's another character you can use in these new stages. Very valuable to have him also because of these extra damage. So I really want to stress that the game's kind of in a interesting state with support where you can use the dedicated 4-star supports. And even Hoshina is gonna be subject to this at some point. And he really is already, to be honest. But you can use those dedicated 4-star supports. But there's this hybridization going on, which is why Chester's so good because he's just a pure 5-star support and he's got the stats to match it. He's fine. But there's a little bit of hybridization, I guess, going on with some of the other characters where you got like Sao, you've got the new Narumi where they are an attacker, a defender, but they've got support attributes in there. And so you get that as well, but you get the benefits of their own role-specific stuff. So that's kind of what's going on here. But Isao, very good. Rin. So I'll put Rin in A tier. And she's getting, and again, this is slight bias just because she is by far the best character in her own mode. So she's getting a slight bump, but really she's a B tier character like these other 5 stars. And you can honestly argue to put Kikaru down in B tier as well, for the record. I think Kikaru performs better than those characters do, but I'm going to give her a slight bump just because she is 10 times better than everyone else. And I'm not joking. Maybe 5 times, right? Better than everyone else in a specific mode. So I will give her that. But well, I did say we're basing it off the hardest content, and I don't think she's great there. So, no, I won't give her that. But I will mention it, so there you go. Reno. He is clearly an SSS character, easily a character you need to be using if you have him. The new stage really is asking you for... The new content's also really asking you to use an ice shooter, so if there's Reno. Or a element character, then you also have a shot plate there, so it also says Reno, so you could do something like that. But... great damage, great utility, overall extremely strong character, and he's another character that I think, again, is worthwhile. Kafka, I think, is interesting. I think he's probably too slow, admittedly, so that's the problem. Probably too slow with his transformation, and then even then, the transformation is not really what you want to have in the hardest content, and so he's a little bit suppressed. This new Kikaru is easily SS, in my opinion. Extremely strong character for the spam and the stacking of defense downs. So that's mostly it. And then blunt typing, again, blast attacking, blunt typing, only character in the game that does that outside of Sagan's ultimate. So unless this guy down here has something, Kaiju, I don't think so. But anyway, very strong, easily a character that I think is probably underrated. It's unfortunate because her damage doesn't peak that highly. I always say this because her attack set's really low. But I think she's really good. Now, the new character, Narumi. I think, here's the thing. I actually think you can make an argument to slide him to SSS because of the utility he has. However, in the perfect world where all the options are available, you don't necessarily need his randomized plate breaking. And so I'm going to place him into SS as well. And this is the only time throughout the entire list you see 2 characters that are, frankly, the same character, but 2 characters that want to accomplish basically the same thing, and one does not get suppressed. If you look at the entirety of the list, they all get suppressed except for this. Otherwise, I would have said Isao's SSS, because he's the best team supporter. I didn't talk about that with him. I've talked about it before. Sagan's very selective. Isao is a team supporter. So there's that. You could argue, I guess, in that case to go up. But the reason why he is here is because I don't think he is a character that you necessarily need right now. However, the argument for a triple S, though, is the support in there. Can I make an SSS? Because I think there's a very clear break between him and the other characters. But at the same time, I think he's actually better than the other characters in SS. Oh, man. I'm not going to do that. But I think he's closer to the SS characters than I think he is to the SSS characters. How about that? So that's where it'll be a break. But typically left to right doesn't matter. But he is the best SS character in my opinion. So there's that. Anyway, the support is strong with him. Seen Through is useful. The ultimate spam is useful. The damage is good if you build him for DPS as opposed to ultimate spam, which is what I liked instead. Ultimate charge, the old Narumi's weapon, things like that. You could go pure DPS with his new weapon, crit damage on the body part, things like that. You don't have to build my build, but I think he's very useful. I just don't think you necessarily need him. Now, here's the kicker. In a world where you need 2 teams, well, guess what? The top 2 rows are pretty much your 2 teams. If you've got everything. If you don't got certain pieces, that's where the 3rd row kicks in. And if you don't got those, then you probably should try to get those characters. I wouldn't go much below that. I wouldn't go below S typically in trying to clear the hardest of content, right? Now, again, shout out to those 2 characters in B tier. You can put them in there with some SS characters and get the job done, but that's mostly it. So overall, though, I do think there's an argument, like I said, for him to go higher. I just will not push him higher at this time, because I don't think he is of the same quality as the triple S characters. I saw some argument about him and Reno. I do think Reno is a better character because of the freeze and action order, stuff like that, and also the element. It's kind of tricky because another thing too is like he's just pure single target. If he actually had blast attacks in there, he would easily be triple S. I think that's the one thing that kind of holds him back from being triple S, is that, other than the fact that he would like to also start with an ultimate like the Kikuru does beside him. He can get it extremely quickly by getting a follow-up, but other than that, he's not able to get it so fast. So that's the one thing. Anyway, already longer than I wanted it to be. Let me know your thoughts. I know I can't make everyone happy. If you skip to the end, if there's something you don't like, please scrub to the part of the video where I explain said character, because I'm not going to answer you in the comments. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to see the video I put out as well, featuring Narumi and Hoshina, what's their like couple name? Naru Hoshi? I don't know. If you want to see it, it should be clickable on the screen right now, and I will see you all in that video. He looks a little bit different because I came back later on and I forgot to talk about this, but face cam's even on, so there's that. But so really quick, one thing that we figured out, because they didn't tell us about this, I think shout out to Gigi for figuring this out, or somebody figured, I don't know, I think that's who it was. But anyway, I actually need to make a quick change. We need to move KG, I don't know which one, up. We need to actually move him up into A. I think A is still appropriate. You could argue S because the shot blunt, but I'm not going there. I'll place him in A. Why? So stun has good utility. He's got, again, shot and blunt. That's good. It's actually the only spread like that in the game, because it's kind of weird because blunt is typically a physical attack, so he's weird. So he does a shot. Anyway, he's got an AoE too, if you care about that. But the real thing he's doing is the stun. And one thing that we found out is stun actually increases your critical damage. I'm gonna have to do calculations on by how much, but it increasing your critical damage is impactful, and you really see characters, from what I've seen, because I haven't built them yet, you really see characters that rely on just pure DPS like a Hoshina pop off with that investment there. I'll have to again do calculations on it, see how much it's worth in relation, how good it is in relation to some of the other support that we have. But last time I did calculations, I really settled on that damage dealt increases and crit damage were obviously the best two. Didn't really want the Rio attack increase because enemies were suppressing that with high defensive stats. That's probably worse on new content, for the record, on Rio. Chester giving just a flat attack is still better than Rio's attack. It was translating to 17% because it was getting so heavily suppressed and just due to the way it was calculating. But Chester giving out 1,000 flat attack, variable number, it goes up, I just hecka spit everywhere, is better. Right. So anyway, the stun, the crit damage is the most important thing there. And then also in some of the new stages, there is a blunt requirement, so you can also use him. And again, he's got shots. He's kind of got an interesting style, so he's a character you can plug in. Last thing I'd like to say on Narumi. So on Narumi, I did this entire list without considering duplicates. However, I think that even with this first dupe gets really strong, because all of a sudden he doesn't really have any sort of issue. He can get to the ultimate fine with follow-ups, but all of a sudden he doesn't really have that issue with that first dupe, because the first dupe gets extra 30 ult gauge that also gets doubled, right? So it's pretty crazy. You still need that follow-up, but it's fine. Anyway, on Narumi though, in a setup where he's mostly a pure DPS character, and especially if he has dupes, of course, he winds up being an extremely strong offensive character. He still does not reach the peak, I think, with the other two characters above him as DPSs. And so with that being said, I think you could make a strong triple S argument for him, but I'm not going to in this video. We're going to leave it where it is. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll see you all in the next one.